All right. Hold on, just 1 second. 1 second. Just allow me to set this up real quick. All right. 1 second. All right, couple more minutes. Let me make sure everything is in working order, and we'll get started. All right, so nonetheless, we'll go ahead and get started. So tonight's lesson will be on the exile of the Northern Kingdom of Israel. For those who are not familiar with the biblical history of the Northern Kingdom of Israel, okay, they consisted of 10 tribes. All right. So first off, we're going to just get a little history about the nation that had basically taken the 10 tribes of Israel into captivity. All right. So the first half of the PowerPoint is just going to, just it's pretty much basic. It's going to go into, a little bit of information about the Assyrian Empire that did carry away the 10 tribes of Israel, or the Northern Kingdom, into captivity. Okay. So if you can see on the screen, all praise to the Most High. If there's anything I need to fix, then of course I will definitely fix it. Just leave your any comments that you may have in the live chat box, and we'll discuss, and of course, I'll fix any issues that may be that may occur. All right. So I just wanted to go into the exile of the Northern Kingdom of Israel. Okay. So as I said before, dealing with the history of the Northern Kingdom, you could definitely read the book of First Kings chapter 11, and it'll give you the whole breakdown of exactly why the United Kingdom of Israel was basically split into two kingdoms. All right. So of course, it started with Saul. Saul was the first king that was anointed over all Israel. Okay. So of course, you had him. So basically, Saul was the one who was to be the foundation and to build, Israel back up into a military power, because before, during the period of the judges, Israel had no king. Israel was pretty much, they did whatever was lawful and right in their own eyes. Okay, so now we have, so now Israel demanded a king. All right, when you read in the book of First Samuel, chapter 8, the people clearly expressed that they want a king to fight their battles. Okay, to go out before them, to come in before them, so on and so forth, just like the other nations that were around about them as they seen a king. All right, so they needed something fit. Our people needed something physical that they could actually see, bow down themselves to, and pretty much give reverence to. All right, so of course they still believed in the Most High. It's just that they are people. Remember, we have a carnal people. All right, so now going into King David. King David was also one who was also anointed after Saul was basically rejected from the kingship. David was anointed as the new king over all of the nation of Israel. Of course, the Most High selected and chose him, all right, because David was a man after his own heart, okay, that kept righteousness and also always gave praise and honor and glory unto the Heavenly Father, all right. So during David's reign as king and his campaign, he basically subdued many of the nations that were around about us, and put them all into subjection and the servitude unto the nation of Israel, right? To where Israel's military power and might was basically known throughout all of the earth. So now, after the death of King David, we see that Solomon was now anointed as the new king over all Israel. So David had placed his son, okay, Solomon, in power. Now, his father David pretty much, how can I put it? He basically put all the nations into subjection, right? So that there would be a time of peace to where Israel would not have to worry about their enemies rising up against them, all right? So now during from David to the transition of Solomon, now Solomon is the house of the Lord, all right, which we call the temple. So that is where the Most High would now reside amongst the nation of Israel. So he would no longer dwell in a tabernacle. Now he would have a physical temple in which he would actually dwell amongst our nation. All right. So that temple was built in what we know as the city of David, or what we call Zion, or Jerusalem. All right. So now, after Solomon, okay, so during the reign of Solomon, or at the end of his reign, we see that Solomon basically began to transgress or err because of the love that he had for his foreign wives. So now he basically transgressed the laws of the Heavenly Father in the thing that was concerning these wives. So now we see that the Most High sends one of his prophets, and now Jeroboam, okay, who was a servant of Solomon, right, who was of the tribe of Ephraim. This man basically was pretty much anointed by the Most High as king over the 10 tribes of Israel, all right, and Rehoboam was given the tribe of Judah, all right, but we know, as history has it, Benjamin also clave unto the house of Judah, and also the tribe of Levi clave unto the house of unto the house of David, all right, or the tribe of Judah. So now you had 10 tribes, okay, that were to the north, and you had the 3 tribes that were to the south, okay. So now just get into the history. So now getting into a little bit more of the history to explain a little bit more, we see that Jeroboam had caused Israel to sin, a great sin, and go against and cause the 10 tribes of Israel to commit sin in the eyes of the Most High by worshiping golden calves. All right. So then that the 10 tribes will no longer go down to Jerusalem to serve the Heavenly Father, but now they will serve these tribes. Now they will serve these calves. So this was all the device that Jeroboam had came up for himself. Okay. It can be explained. You can go and read this history throughout the scriptures. It's in the book of First Kings, and also you can read in the book of the Samuels as well. For the history that I just explained to you, that was just a brief synopsis of it. So now we can get a little bit more to the PowerPoint. So now the exile of the northern kingdom of Israel. So now let's get a little bit about the nation that basically exiled exiled the 10 tribes. Okay, so who are the Assyrians? All right, so that's the question that we're going to ask ourselves. So who are the Assyrians themselves? Okay, so hold on, I'm sorry, let me see. I don't see it's moving here. All right, so now we'll see, it says who are the Assyrians, and it says the Assyria was built out of the remnants of the Akkadian by both internal and external forces. The people of Assyria were largely Semitic, like the Akkadians before them, and actually used the Akkadian spoke, excuse me, and used the Akkadian spoken and writing language. All right, and that's in you can read about that in Genesis chapter 11 and verse 1. Excuse me. But so basically, primarily to just to go back over it a little bit, it says Assyria was built out of the remnant of the Akkadian Empire after it was crushed by both internal and external forces. All right, so basically, it crumbled from the inside out. All right, so it says the people of Assyria were largely Semitic, so they were basically a largely Semitic people. All right, and you'll see why in the next verse or in the next part in which we're going to read. So it says, and like the Akkadians before them, and actually used the Akkadian spoken and writing language. All right. So remember, the earth was of one speech and of one language. All right. So that language was what we know as Hebrew. Okay. So now, and now let's read the next part. So in Genesis chapter 10, this is the scripture. Genesis chapter 10, 21 through 22. Okay, in the KJV version of the Bible, it says, "Unto Shem also, the father of all the children of Eber, the brother of Japheth the elder, even to him were children born. The children of Shem, Elam, Asher, Arphaxad, Lud, and Aram." All right. So now you see that you see why it says that the Assyria was largely Semitic. All right. So now it says them being Semitic. Remember, they were descendants of Shem. Okay. So now it says here that so Shem, as you can see, Shem had basically five sons. All right. So now as you see, Esher was one of those sons. Okay. So Esher was the son of Shem. All right. The Assyrians were a Shemitic people. Okay. So they were descendants of Shem. And it says, after the fall of the Akkad Empire, then Esher began to build the cities of Nineveh, Rehoboth, Rezin, and Calah. Right. So after So now, after the fall of that empire, so remember the Akkadian Empire was basically supposed to be one of the first world empires, all right, that came upon the face of the earth, all right. So, so now it says after the fall of this empire, you see that Asher began to build its own cities, all right, for itself, all right, and that's where it says, when you see Nineveh, you see Rehoboth, you see Rezin, and you see Calah. All right, so those are the cities that those are the cities that they built. So now the land of Ashur. Okay, so now we're going to go to the book of Genesis chapter 10, verses 9 through 12. All right, if you don't have the Bible out in front of you, you can read the scripture on the screen. And it says, and he was a mighty hunter before the Lord. Wherefore it is said, even as Nimrod, the mighty hunter before the Lord. All right, so you see Nimrod, okay, who was the first world, basically, who was the first world, how you say, conqueror, all right, who ruled the world's first empire. As it says, the Akkadian Empire was one of the first, all right. So he ruled over that empire. So and it says in 10, and beginning his kingdom was Babel and Erech and Akkad, right? And Calneh in the land of Shinar. Okay, so now as you can see, that's why they call it the Akkadian Empire, because it was one of the cities in which Nimrod ruled over. All right. So now it says, verse 11, and out of that land went forth Ashur and built Nineveh and the city of Rehoboth and Calah and Rezin between Nineveh and Calah. The same is the great city. All right. So as you can see, This is the city of Nineveh right here. All right. So as you can see, this is where Esther had began to set up shop. All right. So right here where it says Esther Bar, that was also one of his cities as well. Okay. So now after the empire broke up, it said that he went and he founded his own cities. All right. So now, oops. So now you see the Neo-Assyrian Empire. So as you can see, when it's referring to the Neo-Assyrian Empire, it's referring to the new Assyrian Empire. All right. So they had old Assyrian Empire, which was, of course, also during the time of who we know as Nimrod, and now you see that this is the new Assyrian Empire here. Okay. So now it says the Neo-Assyrian Empire was a major Iron Age empire that existed between 911 BCE and between 609 BCE. The Neo-Assyrian Empire was founded in the aftermath of the reform of Tiglath-Pileser III in the 8th century BCE, which saw the power of the Assyrians surpass the neighboring Babylonia and Egypt. All right. So we see Babylon was a very powerful nation, and then you see that the Egyptians, they were a very powerful and strong nation as well. All right, so their power basically surpassed, the Babylonians and the Egyptians. Okay, so here is a picture of the empire. This is, you can see the Assyrian Empire. All right, how far of its power it basically pretty much extended. All right, so went into Babylonia. They conquered the Babylonians all the way to what we know as to the land of Egypt, to um, to what we know as parts of Asia Minor. All right. So now here's a list of the kings of the Neo-Assyrian Empire. All right. So remember, it's from 911. Okay, from 911 to about 612 BCE. So that's 612 BCE. You'll find out that's when they actually fell. All right, or were destroyed. So now you have Tiglath-Pileser III, 745 to about 727 BCE. Shalmaneser V, 727 to 722 BCE. And then you have Sargon II, 722 to 705 BCE. All right. Then, of course, you have Sennacherib here, which you read more so about. You read about him in the book of Isaiah, and also you read about him in the book of Tobit as well. Okay. So also Sargon II, you read about in the book of Isaiah. All right. So you see that he took over after Shalmaneser was killed. Okay, during the siege of Samaria. All right, and this is when Sargon II took over. So now it says, so these are the kings, man, that had a very very large part in the deportation of the Israelites. All right, of the Northern Kingdom Israelites. So now, Tiglath-Pileser III. Okay, so let's get a little background about him. So it says in 734, the borders with Egypt were sealed. The tribes of Ammon, Edom, and Moab, who with the Israel had attacked Ahaz of Judah, a vessel of Assyria. Right. So of course, as you can see, those nations, right, from Ammon, Edom, and Moab, right, who with Israel had attacked, also with the northern kingdom had attacked Ahaz, who was the king of Judah. So Ahaz was a very wicked, evil king. All right. And it says a vessel of Assyria. So Ahaz basically he gave himself over to the Assyrians. All right. So let's read on. So now it says and now had to pay tribute. It says over the next 2 years, Tiglath-Pileser systematically broke the power of Damascus. Israel was made subject through the assimilation of Payaka and his replacement by a pro-Assyrian vessel, Hosea, or S.O.I.C., which is a Syrian name. Galilee was made part of an adjacent province. All right. So now, real quick, I wanted to get that part where it talked about how it said that Tiglath systematically broke the power of of Damascus, right? So that was prophesied in the scripture. So let's go into the book of Isaiah real quick, because Isaiah speaks about this. Okay. He speaks about how they will be broken. All right. So now this is in Isaiah chapter 7, and let's read. I'm gonna start at verse 1. Okay. So this is basically approximately around like 732 BCE, and it says, "It came to pass in the days of Ahaz, the son of Jotham, the son of Uzziah, the king of Judah, that Rezin, the king of Syria, and Pekah, the son of Remaliah, the king of Israel, went up towards Jerusalem to Jerusalem to war against it, but could not prevail against it. And it was told the house of David, saying, Syria is confederate with Ephraim. And his heart was moved, and the hearts of his people, as the trees of the woods are moved with the wind." So as you can see, Syria, and of course, you had Syria and the northern kingdom that had made an alliance. All right. So of course, prior to this, you see that Syria, during the time of Ahab, had made a covenant with one another, right? Because there was many wars going on between the Assyrians and also the northern kingdom of Israel. All right. So that's when you're going into like the time of Elisha the prophet, and also Elijah. All right. So during the time of Elisha, it pretty much Ahab and the king of Syria, they basically had made a covenant with one another. All right. So now, so then it says, so let's read on. It says, verse 3. Then said the Lord unto Isaiah, go forth now to meet Ahaz, thou and Shaarazazab, thy son, at the end of the conduit of the upper pool in the highway of the fuller field. All right. Also, you could reference this to Second Chronicles chapter 28. All right. Read the whole chapter, and this goes into the actual battle that took place between Ahaz and Israel and Syria. All right. So now let's drop down, and I want to read verse 4. So it says, we continue reading. And say unto him, take heed and be quiet, fear not, neither be faint hearted. For the two tails of these smoking firebrands, for the fierce anger of Rezin with Syria, and of the son of Remaliah. Because Syria and Ephraim and the son of Remaliah have taken evil counsel against thee, saying, let us go up to against Judah and vex it, and let us make a breach therein for us, and set up a king in the midst of it, even the son of Tobiel. Thus saith the Lord God, it shall not stand, neither shall it come to pass. So their counsel was that they wanted to kill Ahaz, right, and place a king of their own over the northern kingdom for their control purposes. So then it says here, verse 8, for the head of Syria is Damascus, and the head of Damascus is Rezin. Within 65 years shall Ephraim be broken, that it shall be not a people. So this was prophesied, that it said that Syria, all right, that Damascus and the northern kingdom, man, their power will be broken, all right. And it says that Ephraim would not be a people, okay, so meaning that they would be basically carried away captive or go into captivity, all right, and that actually did happen. So of course, as you can see, when you finish reading in the chapters, Isaiah goes into further explaining, man, the captivity of basically of Syria and the northern kingdom, okay, where it talks about where it talks about that in verse 8. You guys can read that on your own. All right, so basically, as it says here, so you can also read Second Kings chapter 15 and verse 19, dealing with King Menahem of Israel. All right, so these are the scriptures where Tiglath-Pileser is mentioned. Okay, and also in First Chronicles chapter 5 and verse 26, the Reubenites, the Gadites, and half the tribe of Manasseh were carried away by Tiglath-Pileser III. All right. So this is the king which exiled, or deported many of the children of Israel into the land of Assyria. All right. So remember, there were I believe, three main deportations before the final deportation in 722. All right. So remember, they carried away the Israelites not as a whole, not as an entire whole, but they carried them away thousands by thousands. All right. So let's go to the next slide. So now this is Shalmaneser the fifth. This is just a little bit about him. So it says Tiglath the third, who followed in rule by Shalmaneser the fifth, who continued the same policy. Shalmaneser V died while on a military conquest of Sumeria in 722. So as you can see, Shalmaneser's reign was short-lived. All right, so he ruled maybe about 5 years, and that was it before the major siege. Was that it? Okay, yeah. So now, when did the 10 tribes become exiled? So let's find out. So now this is dealing with the treason of Hosea, the king of Israel. So now let's open up to the book of Second Kings, chapter 17, and we'll start at verse 1. All right, for those who don't have their Bibles out in front of them, we can also read here um, on the screen. Okay, so it says, in the 12th year of Ahaz, king of Judah, began Hosea, the son of Elath, to reign in Sumeria over Israel 9 years. And he did that which was evil in the sight of the Lord, but not as the kings of Israel that were before him. So basically Hosea was evil, but he wasn't as evil as his predecessors that were before him. All right. So it says, verse 3. Against him came up Shalmaneser, so this is Shalmaneser the fifth, king of Assyria, and Hosea became his servant and gave him presents. So as you can see, Hosea became a servant to Shalmaneser, and the king of Assyria found conspiracy in Hosea, for he had sent messengers to So, king of Egypt, and brought no present to the king of Assyria, as he had done year by year. Therefore, the king of Assyria shut him up and bound him in prison. All right. So, of course, he had taken him, and he basically put him in prison. All right. So now it says once he found out that conspiracy that was going on with him between him and the king of Egypt. So it says Ahaz in the 12th year was in 732 BCE. So remember, that's what we read in Isaiah chapter 7. So it says, in which Hosea became king over Israel. Check that out. Shalmaneser V was in his 5th year of rulership when he took the city of Sumeria in 722 BCE. All right. So you could definitely read all of chapter 17, okay, and it gives you a little bit more in depth on what happened as well. So now, where were the 10 tribes of Israel carried away in Assyria? All right, so where were they carried away? Let's find out. So this is in Second Kings chapter 17, verses 5 and 6. It says, then the king of Assyria came up throughout all the land and went up to Samaria and besieged it 3 years. In the 9th year of Hosea, the king of Assyria took Samaria and carried Israel away into Assyria and placed them in Halah and in the harbor by the river of Gozan and in the cities of the Medes. So that's very important for us to understand. So now you see that the geographical location in which Israel, the northern kingdom, was being taken away or being carried away captive. All right. So let's look at this map right here real quick. So those who can see it, let me see if I can zoom in a little bit more. All right. So now as you can see here is the river, what we call Gozan. Here's the harbor river here. The river goes on. All right. So now you see that they were carried away into we call Gozan, and you see they were carried away into to what we know as Nineveh. All right, and then also it said in the cities of the Medes, right? So here in Ecbatane, all right. So Ecbatane was one of the cities of the Medes. Rages was another city that they were carried away into. So here just some of the cities, man, that you see where the 10 tribes were carried away. Also, you see that this was the route in which was taken, all right. So just as it shows you in the red arrow here, Israelites are exiled to Gozan and Midia, all right. So from Samaria, they traveled through Damascus, Hamath. Then you see that they went through Carchemish into Haran. Then you see the river Gozan, where they probably were taking Israelites, transporting Israelites by the way of the river into the Euphrates, into other parts of what we know as Mesopotamia. Then, like you said, you have Nineveh here. Then you see they were taking them into places of Media as well. All right. So now you're going to see something else here as it shows you in the green. Foreign people are resettled in Israel. All right. So now you see that you're going to see the same route. So from Babylonia, you see that the king of Assyria now, which is Sargon now. Sargon the second took over because Shalmaneser is now dead. Okay. So now he begins to transport uh, other nations into what we know as the land of Samaria. All right. And that's very important. We're going to get that too. So now, who replaced the 10 tribes of Israel in the northern kingdom? Let's find out. Other nations dwelling in the cities of Samaria. So now this is in the book of 2 Kings, chapter 17, and verse. We're going to start at verse 23. Until the Lord removed Israel out of his sight, as he had said by all his servants, the prophets, so was Israel carried away out of their own land to Assyria until this day. So, of course, you still have Israelites that are there in Assyria even until this very day. It's 2017 now. So, guess what? There are Israelites that are still over in that region. All right. Remember, all of them did not leave. So it says, and the king of Syria brought men from Babylon and from Cutha and from Ava and from Hamath and from Sephoraim, right, and placed them in the cities of Samaria instead of the children of Israel. And they possessed Samaria and dwelt in the cities thereof. All right, so let's hold that real quick and let's go to the New Testament. So now let's see something right here. This is why Christ said this to his disciples, right? So this is in Matthew's chapter 10. So this is Matthew's chapter 10, and I'm going to read verse 12. I'm going to read verse 5. These 12 Yahushua sent forth and commanded them, saying, go not into the way of the Gentiles, and into any city of the Samaritans enter ye not. So he said, and into any of the cities of the Samaritans enter ye not. So he said, don't go into the cities of the Samaritans. And it's going to show you exactly why, because the Samaritans were of people of other nations there. There may have been remnants of Israelites that were there, but the vast majority of them were other nations, right? So that's like you have brothers that's going to Venice Beach. You see that there's a remnant of Israel out there, but the vast majority of the people that are out there are Edomites and other nations. So now, but he said, verse 6, but rather go to the lost sheep of the house of Israel. So he said, so that even shows you, man, that there were no Israelites. There were very rarely any Israelites that were there. All right. But he said, but rather go into the lost sheep of the house of Israel. If it's pertaining to some of the cities of the Samaritans, don't even bother with them, because we're not for them. He said, go and teach the Israelites, man, the lost sheep of the house of Israel. That is who Christ was after. All right. So you can also, if you can, write down Ezra in the Bible, chapter 4 and verse 9. And then, of course, 2 Kings chapter 17 and verse 24. All right. And it gives you more understanding on that as well. So as you see that he transplanted other nations from those regions, as we saw here in this in the map above, from Cutha, Babylon, and they migrated all the way. And as you see here, from Arpad, Hamath, all the way down, he transplanted those peoples in what we know as Samaria. All right. So now next, oops, sorry about that. Now, how were the 10 tribes treated in Assyria? So now that's another question we got to answer. So now, how were the 10 tribes of Israel treated once they got to what we know as Assyria? All right. So let's get an account of that in the scripture. So this is Tobit's account of the oppression of the 10 tribes. Okay. So this is Tobit, the book of Tobit, chapter 3 and verse 15. Now, when Enemenezer was dead, Sennacherib his son reigned in his stead, whose estate was troubled, that I could not go into Media. And in the time of Ebenezer, I gave many alms to my brethren, and gave my bread to the hungry, and my clothes to the naked. And if I saw any of my nation dead or cast about the wall of Nineveh, I buried them. So as you can see, man, just by what Tobit was, just by as Tobit is explaining here, man, he was like, there was brothers going hungry there. There were brothers that had literally had nothing. He said there were men that were being killed, all right, or that were being cast about the walls of this place. And it says in verse 18, and if the king Sennacherib had slain any when he was come and fled from Judea, I buried them privily, for in his wrath he killed many, but the bodies were not found when they were sought for of the king. So he's like, man, they killed. So as you can see, Sennacherib killed many in his rage. All right. And and these were Israelites that this man was killing. So the Israelites were being heavily oppressed, man, in the land of Assyria. Okay. So you'll read about that in other accounts as well. About the oppression of the 10 tribes. You could read a little bit more in the book of Tobit, but I just wanted to pull this out, this account of the oppression that they were going through, all right, through the eyes of Tobit himself. So now, this is dealing with, this is a book I have called The Lost Worlds, all right. So it says captive peoples. It says Assyria was the first of the despotic empires that were to dominate the history of the Western Asia. With her rule, the age of the small independent kingdom or city states came to an end. A series of shifting alliances joined the kingdoms of Antiola and the Levant with the Babylonians and Elamites to the east in the struggle against her. But for centuries, the power of Assyria prevailed. A revolution in Sidon and Tyre in 700 BC was suppressed so fiercely that the Phoenician cities never regained control of the Mediterranean trade, which later passed to Carthage and Greece. The Elamites were punished so vindictively that their ancient civilization vanished. The bones of the Elamite kings were exhumed and carried off to Syria so that their souls would never be at rest. The rebellious kingdom of Israel was wiped out, and its inhabitants, the 10 lost tribes, resettled in the far corners of the empire into its capital. Sumeria was brought to the ancestors of the Samaritans, Persians, Babylonians, Elamites, and exiles from the ancient Sumerian town of York. Besides, the prophets of the Bible, scribes in other lands cried out their hatred against the oppressors. The Syrian king, one Babylonian proclaimed, had an evil intention. He brought out crimes. He had no mercy for the inhabitants, right? So basically, this is how vicious of a people, the Assyrians were to their captives. All right. So it just wasn't only the Israelites, right, but other nations that they conquered as well. They showed how cruel that they could actually be. All right. But as you can see, after the Assyrians went down, you see that there were 4 other empires, man, that came up that was even more powerful than they were and much more crueler than they were. Yes, we're talking about the Babylonians, the Persians and the Medes, the Greeks, and then the Romans. All right. So So it shows you, man. It said the rebellious house of Israel was wiped out. And it says its inhabitants, the 10 lost tribes, resettled in the far corners of the empire into its capital. So, as you can see, man, it's like the Assyrians, they were not a joke, man, when they were in power. All right, so it says here, excuse me, where did the 10 tribes go after the Assyrian captivity ended? Well, let's find out. So the migration into Europe, all right. So they had a migration, which they went into Europe after the Assyrian captivity had ended. So now you pretty much can see, if you can see the map here. Let me see if I can blow it up a little bit more. I don't know how it's going to work on here, just bear with me here. So if you could see the image here. So Ozarith, this is not Ozarith. So just you can X that out of your minds right there. I'm gonna explain a little bit about that as well. So this is Assyria right here. If you can see my cursor and my arrow here. So this was Media. This is where many of the Israelites of the northern kingdom. This is where they were located. All right. So as you can see, that's Nineveh right there. So as you can see here, if you follow in the arrows, this is where many of the Israelites began to migrate. So you have the Sakah, right, or the Scythian peoples. They had Israelites to settle amongst those people. Then you had the Masagat, all right, that the Israelites had went by that name. Um, then, as you can see here, this is what we call the Black Sea. That's the Caspian Sea. So this was a migration of the Israelites from the region of the Caucasus area, of the Caucasus region. All right. So as you can see, this is the places in which they traveled. Okay. So this is Scythia, Swistoid, Vendani, all of these areas in which they began to travel and migrate, all right, into what we know as Western Europe. Okay. So now got Gallia, all of these places, Spain. This is where Israelites began to settle that were in the West. So you see that there were the Sumerians as well. So I want you definitely to key into that name, the Sumerians, all right? Because that's the name that you have to familiarize yourself. Also, the Celts. That's another name that you definitely want to familiarize yourself. And then familiarize yourself with the Scythia, okay? So those three names right there in itself, those are the ones you definitely want to familiarize yourselves with, all right? So Sumerians is Cimmerians. All right. So then you have Scythia up here. So then that's why when you get this real quick, I wanted to show this and also in the book of Colossians, right? Because this is very important for us to understand. So you see many Christians that like to point this out. They say all nations are accepted, which that is not true, but it's showing you something else. All right, so this is in the book of Colossians, chapter 3, and this is in verse 10. I mean, verse 11, excuse me. He says, where there is neither Greek nor Jew, circumcision nor uncircumcision, barbarian, Scythian, bond nor free, but Christ is all and in all, right? So now, let's deal with that a little bit because this is very important for us to understand, man. And this is why, and understand why Paul was making reference to this as well. Okay. Remember, Paul was a very scholarly and very well educated man. All right. He understood about the diaspora of his nation. Okay. A man does not know anything until he understands the history of his own nation. All right. So that's why us as Israelites, man, we focus on so many other things, man, instead of the history of our own nation. All right. So so now Paul, as he says here, where there is neither where there is neither Greek nor Jew. So you had Greek Israelites who were of the Greek who had took on the Greek nationality. You had Israelites that were of Judea, right? You had the circumcision or the uncircumcision. Then you had Jews that were born, what I'm saying, under the law. Then you had Jews that were not born under the law. Then you had barbarians, Jews that, what I'm saying, were primarily of the barbarian tribes, you know what I'm saying, of Western Europe. Then you also had the Scythians, all right. Then he says bond nor free. So basically, the one that you want to key into is Scythian, right? So remember, the Israelites, that were in Media, they began to migrate, you know what I'm saying, north, right, to Scythia. And they began to dwell amongst the inhabitants. Remember, Scythia, that was a Japhetic tribe, right? Amongst them. And historians like Herodotus and all of them, you know, a lot of the Roman historians began to basically, you know, do their rich history and research. They understood that the Israelites were there. All right. So it's the same thing Paul understood too. Israel was there. All right. We were mingled amongst the nations. The scriptures say we mingled amongst the nations and learned their works. All right. So definitely check that out. And I have an insert to prove that as well. All right. So the next slide, check this one out. Hold on. Let me, so this is a book. All right. It's called The Scythians and the Samaritans. Okay. So now, this is just a small little insert from it, but it says the Scythians and the Sumerians, right? So remember, both of them are Israelites. Okay. So it says the Scythians and the Sumerians were both groupings of the tribes of Israel, right? So it says after drafted a number into an into its armies soon after the captivity, they rose to some power in the empire and finally had an opportunity to help bring down their former oppressors before 600 BC. Quite early elements of the Sumerians migrated west across Asia Minor, today's Turkey, conquering and fighting whoever stood in their path until they linked and merged with the Celts already in northwest Europe and Britain. The Celts were kinsmen Israelites who had migrated centuries earlier to find trade and mining colonies. Right. So this is this is definitely some definitely a good information, man. Let's definitely check out that book as well. All right. So it's showing you right there, man, that the Scythians and Sumerians, they were Israelites. All right. So you see that the Sumerians basically helped take down, you know, the Assyrians. All right. So they basically helped the Babylonians take down the Assyrians. All right. Um, so now, so it says they began to migrate. The Sumerians migrated across what we know as Western uh, migrated west across Asia Minor, or what we know as Turkey. All right, and they began to conquer many of the other inhabitants and pushing them out. All right, the other inhabitants that were there, they were the children of Japheth. All right, so now you see that it says that they were going to link up with the Celts already in northwest Europe and Britain. The Celts were kinsmen Israelites who migrated centuries early to find trade and mining colonies there. All right. So they linked up with their brethren. Okay. Let's get a little bit more. So now the 10 tribes travel to America. Like I said, some of this is just very brief and, very, very good points. So the 10 tribes travel to Americas. So it says in Second Ezra chapter 13, verses 40 through 45. All right. So now it says, those are the 10 tribes which were carried away prisoner out of their own land in the time of Hosea the king, whom Shalmaneser the king of Assyria led away captive, and he carried them over the waters. And so came they into another land, right? So they came into another land. So that's what you really want to definitely stress and point out, man, because this goes into a lot of the brothers and sisters, man, that speak about how all of the 12 tribes are Negroes, right? Especially those of the 10 tribes of Israel. Okay, so now it says they came over the waters and came into another land. Another land was, of course, what we know as the land of Assyria, Media, so on and so forth. So it says, but they took counsel among themselves that they would leave the multitude of the heathen. So key into that too, it said they would leave the multitude of the heathen and go forth into a further country. They would go to a further country where never mankind dwelt. So basically key into that as well. Underline that. Where never mankind dwelt. that they might keep their statutes, which they never kept in their own land. So they entered into the Euphrates by a narrow place in the river. For the Most High then showed signs for them and held still the flood till they were passed over. For though that country where there was a great way to go, namely a year and a half, and the name and the same region is called Arzareth. All right, so the same region is called Arzareth. So there's a lot of misinformation out there, disinformation, if you as you want to call it, out there about what we know as Arzareth. Okay, so the key things that you want to make sure that you underline is that, of course, they went into the land of Assyria, right? But they took counsel among themselves that they would leave the multitude of the heathen, go into a further country where never mankind dwelt, right? And it says, so boom, 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 boom. He held still the flood to where they went through a country, namely great, where there was a great ways to go, namely a year and a half, and the same region is called Ozareth. So now let's check out this map right here. All right, so this is a world map. All right, countries, dialing codes, all of that stuff. But so this is just a map of the world. So as you can see, during of course, we all know biblical history, right? Those of us that are very sound in it, you see that history shows us that the flood, okay, of course, it covered the entire earth. You see that Noah was here, all right? His ark landed here, what we know as Mount Ararat, which is like modern day Armenia, or which is like near Turkey. So basically, all nations began to resettle or reoccupy the lands, right, which they originally came from, which is the Mesopotamia. So you see, like, say, for instance, Iraq, which is Iraq to Syria. That's what you call Mesopotamia. And then, of course, you see all of this land was pretty much primarily taken over, all right, by the nations. Okay, so remember, it was repopulated. So Japheth, remember, he had all of Europe, what you call the Isles of the Gentiles, the islands, so on and so forth, in the Mediterranean. Then you see that Shem, of course, the Middle East, Iran, the Middle East, India, going into Malaysia, so on and so forth, right? Then you see Ham, pretty much Africa, from Turkey, the Levant, Africa, and this is where all of mankind pretty much dwelt at this moment in time. All right. So now, when it says a region where never mankind dwelt, so now how is it that you could say Asia Minor or Turkey is a land or a region or a country where never mankind dwelt? It was already populated. It was already populated at this time. All right. Japheth was there. You had a son of Shem was there. All right. So this land was heavily populated with people. Okay. So now, where would the 10 tribes go? They said they wanted to leave the multitude of the heathen. Right. So remember, it said that their brethren, the Sumerians, were crossing from what we know as Turkey into what we know as Europe. So you have brothers and sisters that was there. So now, what about? So now, where else would they go if everywhere else is occupied? Egypt was occupied. India was occupied. Ophir. They knew all of these regions were occupied with other nations. All right. So now they had to go somewhere where no nation had ever dwelt before. All right. So now, bam, they came over here to what we know as the Americas. Right. And this is where they began to inhabit. Okay, you could say about the which is like a access way in which the Phoenicians and the Israelites had there to the America for mining colonies, so on and so forth, right? But as we can see, the Americas was a place where never had originally part of the world. All right, the Western Hemisphere was not occupied. This is from a book called The Aztecs, right? For all the 10 tribe naysayers. So the Aztecs, it says, because of all these things, my suspicions are confirmed that of Israel, which Shalom captured and took to Assyria in the time of Hosea, king of Israel, and in the time of Ezekiah, king of Jerusalem, as can be read in the fourth book of Kings 17, right? So they call it the fourth book, and we call it the second book. So it says, where one finds that Israel was carried away out of its own land, it also is also that and distant country had never been inhabited before. There was a long and tedious journey of a year to the region where today are, let's cut off right there, for these people of the islands and the mainlands towards the western beyond the sea found in the holy right that can be cited to prove this idea is God through Hosea multitude. God promised to multiply these people like the sands of the sea. Right. So this is just as an insert, man, from what we know as this is what pretty much the how can I put it, the historian that was doing the research, man, came to the conclusion of.
What about people who don't think that the Aztecs are Israelites?
Well, you got to get this book to find out a lot of the customs and all of that of the Aztecs. So here's another part of the insert right here of the Aztecs. So it basically shows you, it says, in the Holy Scriptures, I cannot help but to believe that these Indians are the children of Israel. They made sacrifices in the mountains and under shaded trees, and the caves and caverns of the dark and gloomy earth. They burned incense, killed their sons and their daughters, and sacrificed them and offered them as victims to their gods. They sacrificed their children, ate human flesh, killed prisoners and captives of war. All of these were also Hebrew ceremonies practiced by those 10 tribes of Israel, and all were carried out with the greatest rituals and superstitions that it is possible to conceive.
Child sacrifice,
cannibalism?
cannibalism.
Absolutely.
That wasn't our custom. That was a heathenistic thing.
That's what they learned. Now check this out. This is in the book of Psalms. In the book of Psalms, chapter 106, and this is verse and this is I'm gonna start at verse 35, and it says, but they were mingled amongst the heathen and learned their works, and they served their idols, which were a snare unto them. Yea, they sacrificed their sons and their daughters unto devils. They shed innocent blood, even the blood of their sons and their daughters, whom they sacrificed unto the idols of Canaan. And the land was polluted with blood. Thus were they defiled with their own works and went whoring with their own inventions. Therefore was the wrath of Yahweh kindled against the people, insomuch that he abhorred his own inheritance and gave them into the hand of the heathen, and they that hated them ruled over them. Right. So now that did happen. All right. The Aztecs were taken down by the Spanish conquistadors. So remember, those that hated them, they were given into their hands. All right. So they did sacrifice their sons and their daughters, and this is the exact scripture that the author of this book also gives. You know what I'm saying? Up under it, it's cut off, but you can't see it. But it also it's dealing with the same scripture. All right. So remember, they just basically used the customs of the scriptures, man, and they as they observed these natives, and it's like, man, many of their customs are very familiar. I've read this somewhere before. Remember, people weren't as dumbed down as they are right now, man. You know, people back then, they were very well read, so they could understand it, and they knew the Bible very well. So they could see something, they could be like, damn, you know what? I've seen that custom being performed somewhere before. The Jewish people there, they perform it. So let's read. Let's continue. So now this is also another insert from a book called The Lost Tribes in the Promised Land. So it says, So Antonio de Montesinos, he became fully convinced that the American Indians constituted some of the 10 lost tribes of Israel. So he said, constitute of some of the 10 lost tribes of Israel. Right? So I agree. So it says, and Manasseh heard a very remarkable thing from Montesinos that in 1642, when Montesinos was deep in the mountains of the wilderness of Ecuador, he met with 4 Indians who greeted him with Shema Israel, which is the traditional creed of Israelites beginning with Hear, O Israel. The Lord our God, the Lord is one. Deuteronomy 6 and 4. He claimed that he spoke with them in Hebrew and claimed they were from the lost tribe of Reuben and Levi. Right? So it says here that Reuben, which is supposed to be a Seminole Indians, was in the mountains of Ecuador, and it says it shows you that Levi was right there with them. So they were in South America. So remember, Reuben is supposed to be a Seminole Indians. No connection, right? No connection. Okay. So Seminole history is very interesting as well. So now this is from the exclaimer.com. All right. So it says in a famous book, The History of the American Indians, 18th century explorer and trader John Adair stated that several hundred Cherokees living in the North Carolina mountains spake in an ancient Jewish language that was nearly unintelligible to Jews from England and Holland. For this observation, Adair exploited a belief that all Native Americans were the descendants of the 10 tribes of Israel. Right? So this is what he was like. He came to the conclusion of, yeah, that these Native Americans were pretty much of the 10 tribes of Israel, right? So it says Adair genuinely admired Native Americans and was married to a Choctaw woman. However, his popular theory was twisted during the American Revolution. All right. So boom, boom, boom. Let's move on to the second part of this. So now it says, let's check this out. So now it says the laboratory immediately stumbled into a scientific hornet's nest that the Cherokee princess in someone's genealogy was most likely a Jewish or North African princess. Its scientists have labeled the Cherokees not as Native Americans, but as a Middle Eastern North African population. Cherokees have high levels of test markers associated with the Berbers, native Turks, Lebanese, Hebrews, and Mesopotamians. Genetically, they are more Jewish than the typical American Jew of European ancestry. So it's saying that, check that out, genetically. So right, so of course from the Middle East. So of course the Cherokee they have genetics that come from the Middle East, right? And from those different ethnic groups, but main one of them looking at is Hebrew here. So it says genetically they are more Jewish than the typical American Jew of Eastern and ancestry, of European ancestry. So they're saying that the Cherokee, right? Cherokee Indians are more Jew in blood genetically than the European Jews, the white Jews, right? It's crazy. So so that definitely shows you, man, something about the Native American Indians here. All right. So it says so-called full-blooded Cherokees have high levels of European DNA and trace of Asiatic Native American DNA. Their skin color and facial features are primarily Semitic in origin, not Native American. Outraged Cherokees can read the report at what we know as right here. All right, so you guys can check that out for yourselves. But just go back to show, man. That's the point I want to prove. It says genetically they are more Jewish than a typical American Jew of European ancestry. All right, so that's very powerful in itself, man. So it's just showing you right there that of course that some of these Native Americans are in fact Israelites, all right, and have been here way before uh the African American, or excuse me, the African slaves, quote unquote, right? Came over here by way of cargo slave ships. So this is dealing with archaeology of the Bible or archaeology of biblical sources, okay? Just to show you that these tribes did exist themselves. So this one I wanted to go just to the black obelisk of Shalmaneser. So for the naysayers that feel like, oh, the Israelites never existed, well, here is something that is in another ancient society's records. So it said the black obelisk of Shalmaneser III is a black limestone Neo-Assyrian uh, bas relief sculpture from Nimrud, ancient Kalhu, in northern Iraq, commemorating the deeds of King Shalmaneser III's reign in 858 to 824 BC. It is the most complete Assyrian obelisk yet discovered, and it is historically significant because it is thought to display the earliest ancient depiction of a biblical figure, right? So for many of those that believe that the Bible is a fictitious book, it's showing you right here that, in another record, right, in the black obelisk of Shalmaneser, so this is their records in which they took, okay, pictures and all. So it says, depicting a biblical figure, Jehu, king of Israel, the traditional identification of Yahweh, as Jehu has been questioned by some scholars whose purpose that the inscription refers to another king, Jeroham of Israel. Right? So either way, whether it's Jehu or Jeroham, it's showing you that they were Israelites, all right? And they were Israelite kings. It says it refers to the Pashur, is also the first known reference to the Persians, okay? So remember, the Assyrians, they conquered the Persians too. So now here's another one. This is the royal inscription of Sargon II. In 1874, archaeologists discovered a prism of Sargon dated to the early 8th century BC reading. At the beginning of my royal rule, the town of the Sumerians, I besieged, conquered, line 2 was destroyed, for the God whom let me achieve this my triumph. I led away a prisoner, 27,290 inhabitants of it, and equipped it from among them soldiers to men, 50 chariots for my royal court. To the town I rebuilt better than it was before, and settled therein people from countries that I had conquered. So in this prism, it's giving you an account, man, of the not only the deportation, but also the resettling or the repopulating of the land of the city of Sumeria, all right, of the Northern Kingdom. And it says, um, settled therein people from countries which I had conquered. I placed an officer of mine as governor over them and imposed upon them tribute as is customary for Assyrian citizens. All right. So this is the Naru prism. Okay. So you can definitely check that out, man, for yourselves. This is the archaeology, man, that we use, man, to prove, and this is outside sources that we use to prove, man, that Israel actually exists, whether good or bad. It's still showing you that there were Israelites that went into captivity in another nation's record, in another empire's record at that. All right. So there's no way that you could disprove Israelites ever existed, right? You got to be a fool, and you have to be an unscholarly person, man, to sit there and think that. All right, when there's other outside sources in biblical archaeology, man, that everyone has not seen yet. So we can only go by the information that we have access to. Well, there's tons of information that we do not have access to. So for you to sit there and exhaust all of your options to say some of people that does not exist is foolish, right? Same thing when you're dealing with the Messiah. All right, it's the same thing. You have not exhausted every single last uh, resource to prove that he does not exist. Okay, so remember, there are books, there are archaeology, there are findings, man, that we as a people, man, may never see, right? But those who are in power in this world, they have that on record and they know what's up. All right. So of course, thank you for tuning in. You can always go back and reference the PowerPoint again. If I do need to do it over again, I will for a better presentation and delivery. So other than that, all praise to the Most High, man. Definitely hope everyone enjoyed the Sabbath, and just continue to strengthen yourselves for the week to come of more trials and tribulations. And definitely, I see you the next Sabbath. So with that, I say shalom to the 12 tribes of Israel.